It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Breakfast, your largest real estate podcast in Australia. If you can't find it here, it probably doesn't exist. And we are talking your property from Darwin to Canberra 7 days a week, streaming right now on multiple platforms, including Apple Podcasts. It is a Wednesday, August the 13th. And don't forget, we've got this new service available to you. If you want to let off steam about the real estate property market, whatever the case may be, leave a voice message. Now, just below this episode, you will find the link. Click on that link, hold the phone up to your mouth and start talking. Super easy, and we look forward to hearing from you and adding your voice onto the Real Estate Breakfast. As we say, more voices the better. Or if you do want to stick with the email, our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Right, let's go to Sydney and catch up with Richard Faludi from Raine and Horne there in Double Bay. And a very good morning to you, Richard. Very busy times, of course, across the area where you are. I just want to go over Coogee, Rose Bay and Bellevue Hill. They are all placed in Australia's top 10 suburbs for house prices, with median values ranging from over 4 million to 10 million, and the apartment market just as sought after in Sydney's east, with Tamarama, Double Bay and Bronte all ranking among the nation's top 10 for unit listings. So, as I say, much going on where you are.
Absolutely. Good morning, and thanks for having me on. I think to comment on that, what we're seeing generally at the moment across those suburbs, and I mean, it's worth noting that Coogee and Tamarama are obviously beachside suburbs, and then suburbs like Rose Bay and Bellevue Hill are considered harbour side. This year, what we've seen is definitely a pickup in sentiment. There's a lot more consumer confidence out there in the market. Just having initially had talks of rate cuts, it does feel as though buyers out there are feeling a bit of a pinch and an urgency, which was kind of void in 2024 and is certainly resurgent now, which is, I think, why we're seeing some of these suburbs see big uplift in pricing.
Yes, good points that you're making. And I just want to talk about these investors that might not be able to get into your area. These price increases in the Double Bays, in the Coogees, etc., they are going to affect the outer suburbs. And I just wonder whether people should be looking at some of these outer suburbs for growth.
Well, I think it's a logical move, right? Because ultimately, not everyone can live within the eastern suburbs. And I think with the change in zoning, we are going to see more density in the east. You know, it makes logical sense that, you know, buyers that are ultimately looking to buy kind of in Bellevue Hill, Rose Bay, Coogee, Tamarama get pushed out, you know, and so therefore long term that has an impact on some of the suburbs that are kind of on the fringe rather of the eastern suburbs. They will by virtue have price increases, which I suppose provide an enticing opportunity for an investor to go, I'll buy this today at X price with the knowledge that it'll be Y price down the line. I think, look, generally speaking, property, particularly in the eastern suburbs, only goes in one direction over time, which is up. But I would say that will end up being the case more broadly as time progresses.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, a lot is going on. And if you look at Rose Bay with their changing zoning laws, how is that in 2025 going to be affecting the price?
It's an interesting one because the change in the LMR or the zoning has actually impacted multiple suburbs, not just Rose Bay, but what we are seeing as an office. And, you know, we've kind of spearheaded this change. What we're seeing is that it seems to be impacting Rose Bay more than the other suburbs. For example, our office has sold, I think, 4 or 5 sites. I've sold one personally it was circa 30 million, where the houses were probably worth, I would say, probably $6 or $7 million each. There was another one which a colleague of mine sold along Dover Road, where, for example, one of the properties struggled to sell for 8. They ended up getting 16 because essentially with the change in zoning, what's feasible or potentially feasible in these areas is significantly more. And so that therefore lifts the value of some of these properties significantly, almost double. But the counter side to that is that there are a lot of people wanting to actually sell out of the area because they don't want to be in a suburb where there's lots of density, which is going to be the long-term impact of this. So, I suppose there are winners and losers on both sides.
We are talking to Richard there in Double Bay. We'll get a little bit of a breakdown on the median house and unit prices in Double Bay when we come back. And I also actually want to ask Richard what his thoughts are. We were talking about this yesterday, about off-market sales. We'll do that next.
Get insider tips from industry professionals and level up your real estate game by unlocking the secrets of successful real estate transactions.
Do you find, from time to time, there are these people, they love to engage in a really deep dive when it comes to body corp. There's multiple things that people can get their sort of noses out of joint and put their nose into other people's business, dare I say that?
Yes. I know as well, in particular in the complex that I live in, there has been one of those neighbours who just has an absolute fit over anything that's not 100% within, the body corporate bylaws. I remember at one point in time, I had an air conditioner installed and the condenser piping that had to, remove the water from the property, it went over common property and she absolutely lost it. And we had to spend a few $100s to go and remove and relocate that pipe elsewhere. So there's always going to be those people. And look, I actually don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I would rather have someone who really cares than have no one in the complex who cares. And I've been to some complexes where no one cares and it's just full of investors and, you trip over the burst sewer main on the way in. The balustradings are all falling apart. No one's reporting issues at the complex, retaining walls, things like that. So I normally suggest to people, I'd be happy to pay slightly higher body corporate fees if they're actually spending the money well and the complex is being taken care of.
I did note that there was a termite-riddled cottage in Brisbane the other day, sold for over $1 million. I like the way that they've reported this. 180 seconds, the hammer came down.
Yeah. Our Brisbane property market, especially for this more affordable stock and the renovators, is still absolutely flying. To buy in these primo locations, we've just got so little stock that even if something is infested with termites, it's still going to fly off the market.
Each week, we bring you in-depth real estate discussions, including inspiring stories from homeowners, knowledgeable real estate professionals and economists. Whether you're a buyer, seller, or just a real estate enthusiast, we are your ultimate property podcast.
It is a Real Estate Wednesday. Hope you've got a great day planned ahead. We are in Double Bay in Sydney talking to Richard. And I want to circle back to something we were talking about yesterday, and that was off-market sales. There could be an argument that because you're in an exclusive area, that, these high price tags, some people, they absolutely cherish their privacy. Is this a case of maybe saying, well, yes, an off-market suits us, although I still stick with it. It's not mass marketing and you're probably not going to get the best price.
I think that if you look at off-market versus on-market, look, at the very, very high end, off-market does seem to be kind of a growing trend where, these properties that are trading at 30, 40, 50 million and beyond are selling very discreetly and quietly. However, if we're talking more broadly, I tend to think that, as an owner, and the agent, how can you have conviction that you are achieving the maximum price when you've only had a couple of people through and then receive an offer? You don't have enough information to substantiate that. One thing I will say, though, is that I think off-market has a place in a campaign and a process. And that's usually leading into, the formalized approach or, as you've said, mass marketing. So you're bringing through some key people people who have the right capacity and right criteria before starting the campaign, because then that provides you with a lot of momentum leading into that process. But I think just selling off market in isolation doesn't really yield the urgency and doesn't really provide enough information to substantiate that you're achieving the maximum.
Fair call. Now, I've got to ask you this, and that is because you're in the exclusive area of Double Bay, we've spoken to various agents over the years, and they do tell us these stories about, people turning up saying that, yes, they're going to buy this property, when in reality, they don't have the money at all. They might be showboating with a girlfriend, a love interest, whatever, and they're completely wasting agents' time. Is that something that you have come across, or perhaps one of your colleagues' direct experience?
It definitely happens, right? Like you get buyers coming through inspections and they're kind of, I suppose, talking a big game and it doesn't eventuate to much. But I think that, as the agent, part of your role is to qualify who's real and who's not. And you tend to be able to find out, who the real buyers are versus the fake ones throughout the process.
It's like, get a life. There's clearly not enough going on in somebody's life if they've got to resort to pretending that they're a multi-millionaire. I just don't understand it. But, we've got weird people out there in any suburb across Australia, and they tend to gravitate towards these high-end homes and properties. And just talking about that, the Double Bay Sydney median house price, I see that is now hovering just over 7 million, and the median unit price around that 1.8. The house market has experienced a slight annual capital growth. There were 22, they're reporting, house sales in the past year. Not a lot of house sales, it's got to be said.
No, so I think, you talk about growth, right? And particularly in these suburbs, not to kind of bore you with something that's probably talked about quite a bit on the podcast, but it comes back to supply and demand, right? And I think that the eastern suburbs is a peninsula where there is limited supply, and the demand is always great because it's quite unique having, the beaches, the harbour side, the villages, the city, all the kind of schools in such a condensed area. And so I think when you factor all that in, that's what has created the price growth over time so substantially.
Richard, great to catch up with you there in Double Bay on our Wednesday, breaking down some of the numbers and a little bit about what is going on. So enjoy your Wednesday, and thanks so much for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning.
No worries. Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
Listen to in-depth discussions with industry leaders on investing options, understanding different suburbs with insider perspectives and exclusive tips.
Oh, absolutely. And it's also bringing a lot of people to Townsville, because at the moment, in a way, the best way to explain it, it's still affordable because we can foresee the change coming. And if it's going to follow like Brisbane and the rest of Australia, it's going to get tough. So with the money they're pouring into Townsville, people are trying to get embedded now.
I just want to circle back to Garbett with this report from PropTrack. Now, that range I mentioned from 341 grand in Garbett to 861 in Manly, that lower entry point, boy, all the eyes are on Garbett for that very reason.
Correct, because in a way that just shows you where we're going, but it shows you where we're at the moment. And we are finding a lot more people, and that price will rise because a lot more people can afford units over the house prices these days.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.